Hello, people of the internet, and welcome to it's episode 5 of the Pundits podcast. We've been doing this is our 5th episode. Did we ever think we'd get this far, Simon? Yeah,
Do not.
I'm the host, Michael Block. I host this crazy show, and with me, as always, is my co-host, author, computer whiz, sometimes dad, Simon Canton. How you
Hi.
doing?
Hello, everyone.
For our show today, we're going to take a slightly different tack. We're not going to do any new segments. We're going to talk about something that is close to our hearts, a time where both myself and Simon grew up sometime in the 80s. We're going to talk about our top three 80s movies. We're going to try and do a top three, maybe not in any particular order, maybe in a particular order. And then we might, if we get some time, we might talk about some honorable mentions at the end. And before we get down to our talking about the games itself, we're going to talk about individually how we came to our conclusion. Without naming the games, we're going to do that one by one as we flip through our selection process. Um, how did you come up with the names? Did you just simply throw a pin at a list, or what was it? What was your criteria in looking at this?
Well, we probably watched hundreds of movies. I remember I had like a collection of movie stubs, and I ended up like with so many that I had to just throw them out. There was too many. So we were at the movies at least once a week. So there's a lot of movies to go through. So what I did was I went and found a bunch of like top 100 movies of the 80s lists. And then I went through looking for movies that I both enjoyed watching back then, that I thought were great movies back then, and that I enjoyed watching now. So some movies, for instance, are like kids' movies. So I would have really enjoyed them in the 80s, but not so much now. And some movies were too adult for me, like back then. Like Blade Runner was too, when it came out, we were too young to really get Blade Runner. So I looked for movies that kind of worked for the teenage me and worked for the adult me at the same time. I figured they were kind of um, they had a kind of another level to them. Gesundheit.
Yeah.
So my three movies, yeah, it's things that I've probably watched each of them like 10 times
Yeah.
in the last 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of a weird process. I think I knew straight away. I actually think I knew my top three very quickly, and then they instantly sort of came onto my top three. And then what I did was, um, I mean, I went to IMDb and looked at an 80s list, and I set out a list, and I tried to find something that would maybe disturb my initial kind of three, and it's a three that surprises even me. And and maybe I would change my mind about it in the future. But it's a list that surprises me. But the three I selected, two are clearly something that movies that I fell in love with at the time, fall in love with now, despite any of their failings or not. And the third one we'll talk about, my third one last, is one that I wasn't sure whether I actually appreciated or liked as much at the time, and I think I might like it even more, even though it probably would have be described as the better of the three by sort of the generation. Um, but it's quite interesting, to see why I gravitated those because really, when you go through a list of the '80s movies, okay, it was a time when we were growing up. I mean, so many amazing movies, were brought out during that period. Some that are not on my list are the Star Wars franchise, the Indiana Jones franchise, things that you would have grown up with, and just to be, people might say they're pat now, but when growing up, these were important moments in cinema history. Those kind of movies, those kind of franchises, really hadn't. Um, that kind of excitement, particularly as a youth, those would have effects on people going forward. But certainly they're not on top of my list. And it's funny the kind of movies that will appear on my list when we talk about them later. They're certainly not necessarily Citizen Kane, but they were to me, they're very descriptive of the time and the time for me growing up. So, the movies we might be interested in now as adults might be slightly more sophisticated, etc. But there was a theme with the 80s. Also, I think these movies that I picked anyway, different to perhaps you, the movies I've picked very much are representative of the time period. and you'll see that when I discuss them. Whereas I think your list is maybe slightly not so time specific, which of course might be a huge advantage to your selections because um, they're timeless in that regard, and everything down to style and music is very much centerpiece or very much central to the picks that I've made. But perhaps we can start off with your first selection. We'll move it forward, and I think the first one of your top three that you've chosen of the '80s movies that still resonate with you and resonated with you at the time is a film by the name of Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Yeah.
And I think who hasn't seen this movie?
Yeah, so maybe we should do a little plot summary just in case
Sure.
someone hasn't seen it. Parsa, shout out to Parsa, who sits beside me in work, had never heard of Ferris Bueller's Day.
All right. Well, I mean, that's only a great thing. He can discover this fantastic movie, which I have to admit, before you give your plot summary, I haven't watched in a long time, but there's so many reasons to watch this movie.
Hmm.
Uh, but
Well, it's
anyway,
one of those movies where you think it's like the kind of standard teen comedy from the 80s, and then you rewatch it and you go, actually, no, it's not. It's got more depth to it than that. Anyway, so the summary is Ferris Bueller is a kid in, like a, I don't know, 16, 17-year-old in high school in America. And it's nearly the end of the semester for their final year of high school. I'm not sure what age are Americans when they leave high school. Anyway, maybe he's 18. So he wants to take a day off from school and go and raise some hell and have fun because he's going, well, we're going to go off to college, and his best friend Cameron and he aren't going to see each other, and neither will he see his girlfriend Sloane once he goes off to college. So he then persuades Cameron, who Cameron says he's sick, and then breaks Sloane out of school, and they all go off into the city, borrowing Cameron's dad's car, and have adventures in the city, going to, like, not unreasonable adventures either, where they're like they go to a museum and look at or an art gallery. They look at the artwork. They go up to a high building, maybe the Empire State or something, and look out of that and stuff like. So I'm not giving it a very good sell because it's got more to it. It's got a lot of jokes to it. So Ferris talks to the camera quite a lot. And there's a lot of humor in it. You get to see the principal trying to catch Ferris for skipping school, and Ferris has kind of organized lots of things to make sure he doesn't get caught that happen in his absence. So the principal goes to his house, and there's an automatic message and all that kind of stuff. So it's lots of fun. And then at the same time, Cameron is suicidal and he's sick all the time psychosomatically because he doesn't want to deal with his parents' rotten marriage and the pressure on him and all this kind of stuff. So then Ferris is trying to get Cameron out of his funk and realize that his parents don't control his life. So, yeah.
yeah, I mean, just by way of background, I mean, I've got whatever. I mean, obviously, Ferris is played by Matthew Broderick, who is very much a young and up-and-coming actor at the time. Cameron Fry was played by Alan Ruck, who actually recently, I was rewatching Speed, has a small part, and Mia Sara, an English actress with Sloane. Big shout out to Jeffrey Jones, who plays the principal Ed Rooney, and I mean, as always in this sort of anti-hero, the villain principal is always a fantastic character in these kind of movies, and I mean, doesn't disappoint at all. Jennifer Grey, who obviously was about to go on or had just been in Dirty Dancing, plays Ferris's sister, and there's a few cameos from people along the way, like Charlie Sheen, etc. But some standout movies. And what has to be said as well is this is a film directed by John Hughes, who really is and written by John Hughes, centerpiece to the classic 80s sounds and movies of the time for young adults at the time. I mean, again, he wasn't making Citizen Kane in the 80s, but these are movies that people growing up in that era will remember to this day, still remember it fondly, and in many respects, some of his movies very much stand up, the test of time in the sense that they dealt with, growing up and those kind of teen to turning to adult years, traditional themes, life and love, and that sort of stuff. Fantastic musical numbers, some standout jokes, standout performances, particularly by Matthew Broderick. You alluded to it. The narration to the camera, not something that critics entirely love, all the time, but it was one of the times that, it is a standout, different moment. I remember watching that particular film and thinking, oh right, that's a bit different, etc. And there's an element of it being somewhat of a play-like in that regard.
Well, I mean, the thing I always remember is the credit sequence. So most movies at the time just had the names scrolling up on the screen, and Ferris Bueller had the principal, Mr. Rooney, has gotten dragged through hell basically trying to catch Ferris, and hasn't managed it. Spoiler alert, I guess. Hasn't managed it by the end, so he gets on the school bus because that's the only way he can get home, and he's completely bedraggled. His suit is torn to shreds and whatever, and he gets on, and then he's just hates the world, and you just he doesn't really say anything on the bus. He just his expression tells the whole story, and then it goes through the whole credits with him just sitting on the bus hating the world and just entertaining for I don't know a few minutes. And then at the end, it cuts back to Ferris's house, and Ferris comes out and he says, "What are you waiting here for? It's over. Go home. Go home. The movie's over." And just tells everyone to leave. Which it takes a lot of courage as a filmmaker, I would say, to just have your character saying that he's in a movie and that people should go home because it's over. I don't know. It's quite courageous. And the other thing I wanted to bring up was the fan theory. I don't know if you've heard this.
No. Go on.
That Ferris doesn't exist. Ferris is a figment of Cameron's imagination.
Like an
because,
friend.
huh?
Like an imaginary friend.
Exactly, because the things Ferris does are so ridiculous. He's loved by everyone. He's everything Cameron isn't. Yes. Cameron is kind of a loner who's sick all the time and never goes to school and all this kind of stuff. That Ferris is Cameron's imaginary friend.
Just to stop you before you do that, just for those who haven't seen it, a good quote from it is when Ferris says, "Pardon my French, Gesundheit, pardon my French, but Cameron is so tight that if you stuck a lump of coal up his ass, in 2 weeks you'd have a diamond." Classic line.
So Cameron is incredibly uptight and would never stand up to his dad. Cameron invents this imaginary friend to give him an excuse to stand up to his father and, try and do something about his horrible parents before he's going to go off to college.
Well, I
thought that was an interesting theory as well.
Yeah, I mean, just again, I mean, it's a fantastic selection, but I mean, here it is. It's like a lot of 80s movies that try and deal with this thing. It just does it so very well. It's an adventure romp. At the end of the day, it's a school or youth fantasy about being cool at school, everybody liking you, everything working out for this charming guy. Who imagine Ferris is the type of guy who's going to graduate and charm his way through life, and everything's going to fall well for him. And he gets into these type of japes, along the way, and it's that kind of one day of adventure, which everyone would say, God, I wish I knew Ferris, or I wish I had that day. And, the classic other line, I think it may even be a tagline, is, Ferris says, life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. That's a kind of a line or a That's the centerpiece of the movie. That's John
Mm.
Hughes speaking to his audience and reminiscing about youth and what and what it means to him having been now an older person, obviously a young man at that stage, but older than his the characters he was writing about, with a little bit of wisdom, realizing that you know the, the innocence of youth is not what he's talking about. What he's talking about is the time and beauty of youth, before the grindstone of work and everything else gets on top of everybody, before your dreams have been smashed in. You look at somebody
Well,
who like Ferris, who is open and embracing it, and you look at somebody like Cameron, who's young and already has the weight of the world on his shoulders. And what he's really saying is, you know, relax.
well, I disagree a little bit in that I don't think the film is saying youth particularly, because basically I think, at least what it says to me is that even if you're old, like, don't just think that you have to do day after day after day after day of grinding your day job and never taking time for yourself and never like, okay, today fuck work, I'm going to go into town and I'm going to like sit in the park and look at the ducks or something.
Yeah, I agree with
Um,
you. I agree with you that age is just a number. I think it's easy to use the idea of youth with to sell that idea. But I agree with that. I mean, the central message is you're right. It shouldn't be so connected to youth, which is that whether you're young, Cameron being young in this equation, although I do think the actor's probably older than what he was
Probably
saying at
30
the time.
when he plays
Yeah,
it.
exactly right. Um, but in any whether you be young, that's a kind of a nice way to package it because there's a perception that there's no time or less stress. But actually, that's not necessarily the case then or even now. But there's that excuse to say, look, just have that, you know, fearlessness of youth that's associated with youth, and that should take you all the way through life. Easier to say than than doing it. But to have that spirit, and I mean, I think that spirit, of fearlessness and going after things like love and passion and dreams are very much central to all of his films at that time. That those are the important things in life, and all the other things that you do to get by, really are necessary evils as opposed to things that really,
Yeah.
we're after. And
Work to live rather than living to work.
mm, mm.
Do you want to move on then to your first movie?
Yeah, sure. So my first, and this is a movie that I just love so much, and it's a movie that has had many revivals over the years. It's been referred to in other movies. It's actually not the most popular one at the time, but I think has lasted way longer and will continue to last so much longer. Um, I love this movie. It has so many amazing things in it. It has such great heart. It's another John Hughes movie. It's
Yeah.
definitely my top, one of my three that I've picked. I don't think anything would supplant it. A lot of my movies, of the top three, there's a lot of schmaltzy sort of romance stuff. Although schmaltzy is not the right word for John Hughes. Anyway, it's the film Some Kind of Wonderful. It's directed by John Hughes. It stars Eric Stoltz. It stars Mary Stuart Masterson, the brilliant Mary Stuart Masterson as Watts, and Leah Thompson, who was dating Eric Stoltz at the time, and as Amanda Jones, and a number of other actors who've gone on, like Elijah Cotis, who's now in Chicago PD, who was in Crash. He was also in who else was there? Another a stream of other actors that will come to mind to talk about this movie. This is a very simple kind of a movie. It starts off.
Well,
Um,
it's almost Shakespearean, really, and it's. I guess we can't really get into spoilers without we're discussing the movie because it is such a simple kind of premise. But then it's kind of a cliche, so I don't think it's really spoiling anything for anyone. Like
yeah,
the beauty of the movie, I really love the movie too. I think the beauty is in the telling rather than in the story itself, because the story is kind of
Yeah, the
predictable.
story is like a lot of these kind of things. So there's a kind of a yeah. I agree with you in the sense it's Shakespearean because it's a kind of a love story, a teenage love story with a number of participants in it. I think probably that's the way to do it. There's best friends, um, um, who have this great dynamic chemistry together, and then there's this girl that Eric Stoltz's character, um, for some reason, just feels that he's completely in love with her. That Eric Stoltz, who plays Keith, is in love with this woman, Amanda Jones, and it's again, I'm going to kind of.
I think if you describe the plot as like this is going to spoil it for everyone, but I think without giving a spoiler, it'll spoil it for everyone. So, like Mary Stuart Marsden is, yeah. So Mary Stuart Marsden as Watts, and
Yeah.
Eric as Keith are best friends. Boy and girl are best friends.
Yeah.
And Keith is obsessed with Amanda Jones and keeps drawing pictures of her and says that he loves her and keeps telling Watts how much he loves her. So I think anyone that hears that goes, okay, I know what's going to happen in the end of the movie, pretty
Yeah,
much, because we've seen it 100,000 times.
well, I'm not sure if we did so much back then, but I do think you're right. I mean,
No,
history.
but I don't. But I think you're right. But it's been copied a lot. Like,
Yeah, but I do think you're right when you talk about Shakespeare because that kind of love triangle and not noticing what's right in front of your face, even though it's smacking you in the face on a day-to-day basis, is littered throughout, history, literary history. It's not a new story. But what's so brilliant about this, and maybe it's just my twee silliness, is that, you have this fantastic tomboy played by Mary Stuart Marsden. She was just so cool. She was her own person. She didn't pander. She delivered great bon mots, great stars of wisdom. But what was brilliant was, the way it was played, her pained reluctance to go and tell her friend, how she felt, or about him getting involved with this person she didn't particularly like very much, for loads of different reasons, and how that story played out. And as you say, I mean,
for him the whole way, like no, like everyone figured it out pretty much that she was in love with him. So
yeah,
she
I
then
also think
sacrificing
that,
her own love for her friend the whole time was just, it was pretty.
and I also think the movies, yeah, these movies now are really old, so the statute of limitations on spoilers is a little bit out anyway. But the real point here is,
Well, like if you watch the movie for 5 minutes, you can see. Like I don't reveal anything about the ending, but you can see she's in love with him.
no,
That's obvious from the start.
I'm going to talk about that, but no, and you're absolutely right. There's nothing here which becomes a secret. Very quickly, the setup about who wants to be with who, and what's interesting is obviously this is a movie that came out after Pretty in Pink, which was another John Hughes movie starring Molly Ringwald and John Cryer, and Andrew McCarthy, and also actually James Spader. And again, another great John Hughes movie of the time, which had an almost identical story with different plot variations.
But Pretty in Pink wouldn't be one I'd go back to. Like
funny enough,
I don't know why, but I just like Some Kind of Wonderful. If that came on TV, I'd probably watch it. Pretty in Pink
and
on TV, I go, nah, I'm not really interested.
I'll tell you what, I never warmed. It's a very similar story with changes. Pretty in Pink and Some Kind of Wonderful, but Pretty in Pink had some fantastic little character actors who were a little different than the people you see there, and you could fall in love with them straight away. I'm talking about somebody like John Cryer's Ducky and all this sort of stuff. Molly Ringwald was started at the time, she was whatever. And I mean, it's very funny because I'm going to talk about something else recently. I mean, that whole group of actors who were in that kind of Brat Pack thing at the time were a little bit of a joke as the 80s went on, but in many respects you have to just look back and say, what a talented, and valuable group of films, albeit very similar, albeit because a lot of the films they were all in were made by the same person. But in any event,
like they were valuable for us, I think, as teenagers because they were showing teenagers with things we weren't necessarily in the same. There wasn't cliques and stuff in Irish schools much.
Yeah.
Like people hung around with their friends and stuff, but there wasn't like the geeks and the jocks and that kind of stuff in an Irish school. But like the rest of the stuff, wondering what you're going to do with your life and freaking out about what your parents say and all that kind of stuff, really, was important to hear as a teen.
Yeah, and I mean, as I said, just the difference between some other movies, the way they did it, and Some Kind of Wonderful, were things like, look, the character acting was just, and I mean, again, this is not a Citizen Kane type of movie, but the acting here on these very subtle relationships and added with humor and sensitivity, but real, able in a fairly kind of, as you say, quite straightforward story. Um, you know, they managed to get a number of classic um, moments, a number of classic sort of just characterizations that just were very true and are still true today. I mean, often um, they talk about there's a particular scene that they talk about this, this scene with Watts and with Keith where she kind of gives him this practice kiss, and this is often voted as one of the top 5 screen kisses of movie history of all time. Just sort of, I'm just showing you a clip or a screenshot of that YouTube sort of moment starting off, and again, not going to spoil it by playing anything with that, but the reality is that there are just so many moments like that, and together with a rocking silly 80s kind of themed soundtrack, which doesn't even have any great anthems. Like it's not like a Top Gun, Berlin, Take My Breath Away kind of thing that hit top chart 40s or anything like that, or for 5-week Christmas #1s, nothing like that. But just a great, cool soundtrack.
Like I think
doesn't date.
just what you said just brought something to mind. That I was watching The Americans yesterday,
Yeah.
and I had Phil Collins, Something in the Air or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I can hear Something in the Air, and like 80s music is not good. All the synth pop kind of crap, it's terrible. But as soundtrack music, just as like background, that kind of stuff you're not meant to be concentrating on, it's not bad.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to take that, and we can definitely ramble onto that one. I mean, Phil Collins, in the Air Tonight, it particularly with the synthy thing, does date itself. But at the same time, if you remember that Phil Collins used to do an awful lot of soundtracks, or he used to be, a lot of his songs at that time used to be on cool shows like Miami Vice. And at the time, hearing his songs, like there's an entire kind of 2 or 3 episode arc where Miami Vice basically just did a kind of a music video to Phil Collins. So I think they used 3 of his songs from that same album, including In the Air Tonight and something else, right? And honestly, it was just like gold at the time watching. And again, that's a great show, that really, you look at the movie that came out, which, and it's just like, no. Those shows, they're dated and, probably not as good as I remember them. And we're not doing a list of those type of TV shows. But at the same time, I remember watching those shows, probably when I shouldn't have watched them, way back in the day. And, there was just something cool about that kind of music. I think the one thing about Some Kind of Wonderful is it doesn't really have a particular anthem here and there, but it just has, obviously Watts the drummer.
Yeah, I remember, the bit I remember from it is Watts drumming along the soundtrack. I think
At the start of the movie,
Yeah, at the start of the movie she's drumming, and then maybe the other girl's jogging or something, whilst she's
Well, they did a song called Amanda Jones for a particular scene at the end. But there's a great scene in the middle of the movie where Keith is waiting at a bar. He's waiting for Amanda to visit him, and she hasn't turned up. And without spoiling it, maybe he's being stood up again because she doesn't know what she wants to do. And Watts comes into this bar, and this fantastic song, which I just can't remember at the time. And they have this fantastic conversation where she wants to say things that she can't say, and she kind of has a very frank discussion about where their relationship is at that time. It's a fantastic scene. It's fantastically melded in with this kind of music, and look, I just love it. There's some fantastic stuff. It's a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely see it. Loads of films have copied it since. Yes, in and of itself, it's a a story that, to be fair, has been copied by other people before John Hughes, and John Hughes probably copied a simple story. He
But
himself, Pretty in Pink, which has similar storylines on it. I
but
mean, one
there's
thing
a reason it's told over and over, though.
what
There's a reason it's told over and over. I mean, there's a
exactly?
reason the same story is told over and over. The same as Romeo and Juliet is told over and over, or Macbeth is told over and over in different forms because they are stories that resonate.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I haven't said, and this works as much for Pretty in Pink as some kind of wonderful, is that there is an element of uh, wealth and people coming from the wrong side of the tracks, and that kind of
Yeah.
element is sort of underpinning that sort of both stories in both different movies, and just not Pretty in Pink wouldn't go up in my top three. For some reason, it didn't resonate with me, despite the fantastic um, Molly Ringwald and Andrew McCarthy and James Spader, to be fair, and John Cryer. And I think Harry Dean Stanton plays her dad in that as well. But so there's a fantastic actress. But certainly, going, advising anyone listening to the podcast, two great double bill type of movies. I mean, really two great double bill movies. And all I will say is, I want somebody to do a high def or Blu-ray release of some kind of wonderful. I don't think it would make much different from the copies that are out there because it's not that kind of a film. But I would buy that. I would buy that. That's a special movie. It should definitely be on everyone's who loves movies, and certainly movies of that time. It should definitely be on something that they've watched. So, okay, that was a great discussion on that one, and it got me all jazzed up. So let's go to your second pick. This is a particular favorite of mine. I don't know why it's not on my list, but it's a magical movie. So
Yeah.
you're going to talk about The Princess Bride.
Yeah. So I've probably watched The Princess Bride at least 10 times, if not more. It's a movie where you can watch it with kids because there's nothing that kids can't see in it, really. There's sword fights and stuff, I guess, a little racy for younger kids. So a summary of the plot then is that there's a girl who owns a farm, I guess, called Buttercup at the start. And there's a farm boy that works on the farm called Wesley. And basically they fall in love. But Wesley has no money because he's just a farmhand. So he goes off to seek his fortune, and then Buttercup hears that he dies at sea trying to seek his fortune, killed by the dread pirate Roberts. Buttercup then grows up, and she agrees to marry the prince of the kingdom that she's living in because she's the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. Huh? You dropped out there, Mike.
Was it Humperdinck? Humperdinck,
Yeah,
sorry. Humperdinck, wasn't it?
Yeah. So, but she says that she's never going to love again. She only loves Wesley. And then Prince Humperdinck, it's a plot, basically, to allow him to... He's going to pretend that a neighboring kingdom has kidnapped her on the eve of their wedding. My name is Inigo Montoya. There you go. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Like, there's so many lines that people can quote from it, which, like, if you say to anyone, my name is Inigo Montoya, they can complete the line, pretty much, almost anyone.
Absolutely. Fantastically quotable. I mean, this, again, just to, before you go on with the plot, I mean, look, this is an outstanding pick. I mean, you've got a movie that is so quotable, as you say. Is it William Goldstein is the...
Goldman.
Sorry, is that right? I always
Goldman.
get that wrong. Yeah. Rob Reiner directs, William Goldman. But I mean, just Mandy Patinkin, obviously now with Homeland, Robin Wright with House of Cards. I mean, Simon, what an amazing pick by you. I mean, Robin Wright, I mean, who did not fall in love with Robin Wright when we first saw this movie, you know? Who did not think, Mandy Patinkin's character, Inigo Montoya, it was fantastic. And Andre the Giant, may he rest in peace. Billy Crystal, without mentioning Carrie Ellis, who was just this charming Errol Flynn type of a character, you know, magical film, magical film. Thank God they never tried to make a sequel or a reboot. I mean, I just wouldn't want that at all, you know.
Like even I read the book, and the book is also written by William Goldman, and it just didn't compare to the film, just because the film is just so perfect. Like most of the time, you read a book and then the movie is not a patch on the book. But the movie is better than the book in this case, I think. Not that the book is bad; it's good, but it's not as good as the movie. Um, yeah, I mean that's just like from start to finish. There's not a moment in it where you're going, "Oh, I'm bored," or "This is stupid," or "Oh, that wasn't very funny," or anything like that. And as I said, it's completely safe. Like you could show it to most 10-year-olds or 9-year-olds or whatever, and there's nothing objectionable in it, which is even trickier. Like to be that entertaining when you can show it to kids. Um, like maybe some of the sword fights you wouldn't show to really young kids, but it's it's not like blood and guts spewing everywhere. It's just like people getting stabbed with swords and that's it. Um, so yeah, I mean go and watch it if you haven't watched it.
No, look, absolutely. I mean, I remember going to cinema to watch this film, and you know, it, just everything about it is, I own this film. Everything about it is fantastic. It's charming. It is timeless. I think the one thing about it is um, it's what's fantastic about this pick is that it actually could have been made at any time.
Yeah.
You could make this same movie. The problem is that if you made this movie now in 2015, it would probably have CGI everything out the wazoo, right? And that what worries me. I mean, these type of films were made in the 80s, but set in another world in a different time. So, when you
Like,
make
we
these
should
kind
we
of
should
almost
mention that.
historical things, with swords as opposed to guns and lasers, right? There just needs to be real people and real sets with real stuff, Um, that's
We
the,
should mention, just in case anyone's concerned, because I know there's a lot of people don't like fantasy when it's got dragons and magic and that kind of stuff. There's none of that kind of stuff. Andre the Giant plays a giant, but he's an actual human. Like he's he's not a mystical creature or anything. It's all swords and poison and stuff like that. It's not any magic or dragons or anything that.
but I think the thing is, the writing on the screenplay is very good. The timing of the delivery of the lines, very good. I think there's a lot of lines that wouldn't work if the timing wasn't right, and there's a kind of some of the lines that Mandy Patinkin delivers, just perfect. I mean, like just on the money, like just a really clever kind of a vernacular, very clever comedy. I mean, it has somehow, Rob Reiner has to get some credit for this. Rob Reiner, makes, he's Rob Reiner is, famous, but he's often very careful about the volume of stuff he's delivered over the years. So even though he's been incredibly successful in the movies that he has, directed or produced, he often, he hasn't necessarily been a massive, very prolific director. Although, actually, now that I say that, he's got 23 credits as director on his IMDb page. But he directed Stand By Me, The Sure Thing with John Cusack, The Princess Bride. He went on after The Princess Bride to do When Harry Met Sally. So you're talking about Stand By Me, The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally. 3 off the bat, 85, 86, 87, right? 89, When Harry Met Sally. A Few Good Men, 92, And, I mean, it's an amazing record of, films that will be on classic lists or must-see lists. I mean, classics might be the wrong thing. Although, Harry Met Sally, The Princess Bride, and, Few Good Men, most people should have watched those movies, even just, not necessarily the classics, but stuff that, worth seeing.
Well, when Harry Met Sally was almost, I mean, it was on my expanded list of maybe top 20 or something. Because that as a romance movie is probably pretty much a perfect romance movie. I mean, I compared what you call it, Silver Lining Playbook a few months ago to When Harry Met Sally as a compliment, saying this is on the same level as When Harry Met Sally, meaning this is a romance movie that's, you know, really one of the best ever.
Yeah, I like that film as well, definitely. And I think you're right. I think it did something different. I think lot of these kind of movies that they just have to capture the characters. You know, it has to be like, different characters that make it interesting to the audience. Like no one wants to see the same thing all the time.
Mhm.
And if their story's slightly different, I mean,
Like
I'm
When Harry Met Sally, not
natural
to,
born killers, but I mean, I can understand why people thought that was a classic because they thought these were, you know, a couple that were different to anything that we'd ever seen before. Although you could say it's a kind of a Bonnie and Clyde vernacular, but you know, Princess Bride, amazing movie. I mean, classic movie. Um, yeah, and they don't make them like they used to, and I really mean that because you know it. And it also one thing that I have to say about this as well is that because Carrie Ellis went on to do stuff like Men in Tights, which is kind of a parody scoop of Robin Hood, spoof of Robin Hood. But the truth is that if anyone ever watched any of the old Errol Flynn movies where he played Robin Hood, him playing opposite Olivia de Havilland, there's a huge romantic element to those stories, those the Robin Hood movies back in the time, and even some of the other kind of swashbuckling movies that Errol Flynn did, like you know Captain Blood, I think, as well, and other movies. You know, it kind of captured that in a real way, and very other movies that have tried to do that have not been able to capture that. So if you look at other things like Prince of Thieves or the sort of swords and kingdoms of heaven and all this sort of stuff, it really just doesn't have that sense of joviality and romance and sort of charm. And you need a particular type of actors to kind of sell that story without making it all a little bit, um, coy,
well,
or
I was
twee.
going to mention that actually on Ferris Bueller, but we moved on a bit.
Sure.
But if you look at the actors in the 80s of the biggest movies, like Harry Lewis in Princess Bride, obviously, but Michael J. Fox and Matthew Broderick and things like that, it is a kind of light-hearted, kind of joy of life kind of acting, where now you tend to get in teenage movies, you tend to get the dour,
Mm.
like life is terrible, why does no one understand me kind of acting, where
And
it'd be actually refreshing.
and that represents the idea of what was going on in the 80s.
Mm.
Coming out of the Cold War, or kind of that kind of, that kind of idea. There was a lot more. It was different times. I mean, actually, it's very funny you say that because if you contrast When Harry Met Sally with Silver Linings Playbook, you know, it's completely different atmosphere. You know,
Mm.
one is much darker than the other. You know, um, albeit I want to give When Harry Met Sally some props. It's not just some fluff piece, um, but no, and I think that's what's interesting about when you pick movies of a time period, how they will be different. The Princess Bride certainly will have um, a jovial nature of it, but it wasn't set in the 80s. It was set in a different alternative universe, probably historically,
Mm.
swords and whatever. So it doesn't have those kind of common ideas that you might see, When Harry Met Sally or a Ferris Bueller or a some kind of wonderful. You can't
That's
contrast it with that.
like in a lot of 80s movies, you'll see, yeah, the ideas of the time, or 60s or 70s or 90s, whatever it happens to be. With Princess Bride, I could imagine Princess Bride having been made in the 60s or having been made in the 2000s or whatever. It doesn't really, it doesn't time period. Maybe we should jump to your next movie rather than it's
No,
kind
but that was definitely interesting. I mean, we could talk for ages. I think my next selection, if I can remember correctly, is a movie, again, very much set at its time, not in a fantasy universe. And it's a movie, um, a particular favorite of mine. It's another love story. It's another kind of average Joe meeting somebody who is maybe perceived to be above his station, but not necessarily for. In Keith's case, he was looking for Amanda Jones, who may be from the right side of the tracks, but she was more beautiful than him, or was more popular with the that crowd. There's a similar theme to the movie I'm going to talk about now. It's a movie directed by Cameron Crowe, and it stars John Cusack, Ione Skye, and it's a film called Say Anything. And I mean, this is a film that I will never really ever forget because even from hearing about this film, I remember first seeing the trailer for this film and wanting to see it, and it's it's a fantastic story. It's about, I mean, IMDb says it's about a chap called Lloyd Dobler. He's a very average Joe. He's kind of simple, he's he's a good guy, but he's a simple guy. And I don't mean simple by being stupid, but just he has very basic kind of ideas. He wants to, similar to Keith, he kind of falls in love with this girl played by Ione Skye, and Diane Court, and he doesn't really know her that well. Similar to the whole situation that we have in Some Kind of Wonderful, where Keith falls in love with Amanda, but they don't really know each other at all. So he's kind of falling in love with this girl, not that he knows her. She's, top of her class. She's beautiful. She's very popular. She's about to go off to college, and she's from a wealthy family, if you like.
I thought she wasn't popular. I thought that was the point, that she was a nerd who hadn't made any friends.
Well, you are right that she's referred to. Well, she's referred to the body of a game hostess with the brain of whatever, the brain with the body of a game hostess. So I think maybe she wasn't popular because she was a little bit bookish, but she certainly was popular in the sense it was popular. She had everything at her fingertips, etc. But again, Lloyd falls in love with this girl, and it's a typical Cameron Crowe type of movie. It has elements that you would later see in films like Jerry Maguire, and what is typical of any Cameron Crowe films. It's always, whether it be Jerry Maguire, Almost Famous, or Vanilla Sky even, or Say Anything, is, it's got these fantastic sound moments. So this fantastic boombox scene, which is famous. It's been parodied a million times, with fantastic Peter Gabriel soundtrack, In Your Eyes. That's like a standout moment. Again, to see that for the first time, it's been, people know about the scene for, so often now, it becomes almost ridiculous. But I think the effect of that at the time, was hugely impressive. Like all of Cameron, if you even, sorry, the one film I totally missed out on is Elizabethtown, which is another Cameron Crowe film where he just goes to town on his music. And this man is a fantastic filmmaker, but, he would be the best DJ in the world as well, because his ability to sort of tonally produce music for scenes or stories is just, to be honest, I think unparalleled. It's, as I say, I mean, it's a fantastic movie, but coming back for similar reasons to Say Anything. John Cusack, who would never have been, and I've actually grown to like him even more over the years, never been my favorite actor. Just does an amazing job in this movie, and he plays Lloyd fantastically well. Ione Skye is this beautiful, fantastic character who kind of doesn't want to hurt Lloyd's feelings, because she kind of, who is this guy, and she doesn't want to give him a chance, but because Diane is, sort of portrayed as this kind of fair-minded person who's not going to judge people, a book by their cover is what says and say in Some Kind of Wonderful. She gives this guy a chance because of happenstance or circumstance, and it's it's similar to Some Kind of Wonderful. It's the characterization that makes it different and stand out, because when in these romantic comedies or romantic stories, if you have no interest in the two leads, or if they don't have a charm, if they don't have a truth that's coming through, you don't really care. And I mean, I think fundamentally, if the two actors can make that work, and Cameron Crowe has managed to be able to make that work over, with his actors in his various movies, Orlando Bloom, who's not everybody's favorite actor at all, and this is something he's managed to achieve. Certainly in Say Anything for Sure. I mean, standout moments. What are your thoughts? I've talked a little bit about it. I think the characters work. The story's amazing. It goes down an not necessarily expected route. You wouldn't the way the movie goes. You wouldn't necessarily expect it to deal with some darker issues. And have you seen it, or what's your views on this movie?
So, so you mentioned that you were going to that this was going to be one of your three movies on Monday, I think.
Yeah.
So I was trying to watch it on maybe Tuesday, and I watched about 25 minutes of it. So I hadn't seen it before.
Yeah.
It's one of the few 80s movies, kind of teen 80s movies I hadn't seen. And like I couldn't really get into it, and I think it's one of the kind of movies where you the same way as I said about Some Kind of Wonderful, that if you were a teenager, it's perfect probably because it's exactly what you want to see. It's people your age doing things with their lives and making decisions and that kind of stuff. But from my perspective as like a 39-year-old man, it didn't really grab me. Like that said, I haven't watched the whole thing. I've watched 25 minutes, so maybe if I'd watched the whole thing, it would have pulled me in a bit more. But
Yeah.
I had Better Call Saul waiting, so I went. I'll watch that instead.
It's worth giving a try. Again, it's similar to say, there's some fantastic lines,
Like,
where John Cusack is in a phone box, it's pissing raining, and he's sort of saying I think to his sister at the time, who's played by his real sister, Joan Cusack in the movie, I, I gave her my heart and she gave me a pen. And there are moments in that movie that, having gone through, life, you kind of realize where you are, and breakups and stuff like that. There's so many familiar moments where either you've done the dumping or you've been the dumped, and there's elements of that where people who've been going out and are really really close and are in each other's pockets of each other's lives and they love each other, and then all of a sudden that person just can't get far enough away from you, or you can't get far enough away from that person. And I think it's not always easy to capture that stuff on on TV or in film, and in that regard, I think they've done a fantastic job in some of that. So I mean, as I said, they've done some fantastic work in this movie. There's some fantastic, some fantastic kind of ideas that people would have. I think people can relate to in that movie. So.
Like I was going to say earlier, like if it had been a different actor, I think instead of John Cusack. So John Cusack, I don't think is a bad actor. I don't like hate his work or anything. Like in Grosse Pointe Blank, I think he was really good. But just his delivery, like the way he's a very special way of acting, which is kind of a know-it-all kind of guy. So I don't know. It's not something that grabs me immediately that I have to watch. Whereas I'm not sure like who would have been like if Matthew Broderick maybe had been in the role, but I don't know that he necessarily has the gravitas for the role that is. It's not the same as Ferris Bueller's, for instance. So I'm not sure whether a different actor might have grabbed me more, but as I say, I can't really judge it. I haven't watched the whole thing, so.
I would definitely. Well, I'll say no more other than to say I definitely would recommend giving it the whole thing. It's much more serious, say than Some Kind of Wonderful. in the sense that it goes different places, but it's well worth it. It's a true, sorry. There's a certain element of truth in the relationships and the way things work out and not. Um, there is a kind of a Romeo and Juliet sort of aspect of it. Will they? Won't they? And what obstacles being put in place between these two um, lovers, and whether it will work out, all right for them. And again, in the pantheon, if I can use that, of Cameron Crowe movies, there's an element of stories that kind of, when you look at Elizabethtown and when you look at Jerry Maguire and when you look at this movie, you kind of think, oh, is there a common thread going through here? I'm kind of leaving out Vanilla Sky, but and there's an interesting byplay that goes with that. It's kind of interesting, particularly since there always seems to be a plane. But anyway, that's as much as we will do, because I think we're spending a lot of time with each topic, so we'll move on. Let's get to your third and last of that list. Just getting to it now. Your third movie, and again, different, I think, to me. You've again picked another film made in the 80s that potentially, could have been made at any time. And in fact, from my memory, because I haven't rewatched this film in a long time, it's the kind of film that actually could be maybe more described as a 70s scene, in terms of its aesthetic. And maybe that's because it is a film that just came in on the cusp of the 80s. It's 1980. It's a film that's directed by John Landis of Werewolf in London fame. It stars Dan Aykroyd and the late John Belushi. And it is the Blues Brothers. And Simon, why don't you tell us a little bit about that and why it's in your top three?
So, The Blues Brothers is a movie where it's Jake and Jake and Wood Blues. Jake has just gotten out of prison after, I don't know, 5-10 years, something like that. And Elwood comes to pick him up and says that Jake says, "Okay, where's the band?" And Elwood said, "There is no band. You were in jail for the last few years. There's no band anymore." So they go to visit this orphanage run by a nun who raised them, and find out that the orphanage is about to close because they got no money. So they decide that they're going to get the band back together, their Blues Brothers band, and they're going to do a concert to raise money to keep the orphanage open.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the movie is basically their adventures and scrapes as they try and get their band back together and record a concert that's meant to raise thousands of dollars, basically. So they're a band that never played more than a tiny club or a tiny pub or whatever, and they're meant to raise thousands of dollars, so they book a massive stadium, or, well, a massive theater at least.
And we're wearing sunglasses. Get it.
So it's basically a movie about being cool without necessarily being rich or being like having a Ferrari or anything like that. Like, they're dirt poor. They have a second-hand police cruiser. They are completely unsuccessful. They when they go back to Elwood's place, he's got a one-room, tiny little apartment with a train track right outside the window. So every like 5 minutes, the train goes by and the entire room vibrates. They eat toast off like a camp stove burner. And like, they're just dirt poor, and yet they're epically cool at the same time. And so in the behind-the-scenes stuff, I heard that at the time they made it, so as you say, it was 1980, so disco was huge. And all the people that they got back to play the blues, play soul and blues music, wanted to do their disco version of their songs.
Uh-huh.
So disco has not aged well, to say the least. But at the time they said, no, we want the original soul and blues version that you did in the 60s or maybe early 70s, not some disco version. So they had to persuade every single one of these music stars, because all of them were probably on the wane at the time, and disco was coming in, and disco was huge, and they wanted to be disco stars now. They had to persuade them to do their old original versions, and now, looking back, of course, it was entirely the right decision, because blues and soul are still as popular as they ever were, really, and disco is dead, pretty much. I mean, I don't know anyone that goes around listening to disco every day. Whereas you could definitely see people going around listening to blues and soul and Motown music.
Yeah, it's funny just because I remember this. This was a difficult, film to be accessible per se. Certainly when I was growing up, I mean, obviously when it released, we probably didn't watch it when it was absolutely released. And I'm just showing.
No, it would have been 5.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just trying to show. I don't know if I'm sharing this at the moment, but like just the opening scene. Obviously, the film starts up with them coming out of prison. But yeah, we were exactly. I would have been 5. You've been 5. But would have seen it later. But it was quite dark. I mean, it's not hugely accessible. In the same way some of the other movies you and I have both mentioned. But at the same time, one thing I will absolutely agree with you is, even when I saw it for the first time, I don't think I understood it because I was still too young, and then I saw it again afterwards. It's not something you'd ever forget. And it was a crazy kind of eclectic movie with actors who you were aware of. I mean, Dan Aykroyd was massive in the 80s, things like Spy Like Us, all these sort of things. Absolutely. This was darker, though, because the moment you put Belushi into a movie, it's just it's not going to be some silly, funny movie where a few wisecracks between Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd or something along those lines. It was always going to have an edge.
In a way, but I mean, there was certainly silly stuff in it. Like I was just looking at when you were playing the video, I was looking at the also watched videos, and it just says, "I hate Illinois Nazis," which is just hilarious. Because they're like sitting in the police cruiser, and the police have stopped them, like, and there's a march going on this bridge over this river, and they go, "What's going on?" The police guy goes, "Oh, Illinois Nazis, they're doing a march today," and then Elwood just goes, "Illinois Nazis, I fucking hate Illinois Nazis," and they drive the car through the Illinois Nazis, forcing them into the river.
Absolutely, and on the same list, you also watched is like things like best car chase sequence ever, because I mean it's famous for its fantastic car chase sequence there at the time.
Crashed, what was it, like maybe 100 cars or more.
Yeah.
So they at the end of it's maybe a bit of a spoiler, but they get in trouble with the cops basically by the end of the movie, and they have to get the money to a state office when it opens at 8 a.m. the next day. Otherwise, the orphanage is going to close. So they have to run from the cops, and they're like, I don't know, 100 and something miles away. So they go for 100 and something miles in a police chase. There's literally like 100 cop cars going after them.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, I'm reading on IMDb that 103 cars were wrecked during filming, a world record at that time. And
it's just phenomenal.
I just noticed here is Carrie Fisher became engaged to co-star Dan Aykroyd during the shoot shortly after he saved her from choking by applying the Heimlich maneuver. Huh? There would have been no Star Wars 5 and 6. Anyway.
She's great in it as well. But yeah, I mean, like, there's all kinds of silly things. Like, so they get to the state office, and they're in the lift. And at this stage, there's every kind of cop. There's the National Guard, there's the Army, there's everything. And the SWAT guys get out of their van, and they go to the top of the building. And then they're, like, abseiling down the building. And as they go, they're all just going, hut, 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 hut. And, like, you just see, so they're all, like, they get out of their van. Every single thing they do, they say hut, So then, like, they cut to them all abseiling, and you just hear hut 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 hut, and then it just zooms in on one of them, and he's going hut hut. Like, there is plenty of silly humor in it as well.
No, no, no,
Um,
absolutely, absolutely.
so it's
Um,
another movie I've watched like 10 times probably.
yeah,
Um,
and actually, I haven't watched it in a long time. But I mean, I remember watching the sequel after that as well. There was a
oh, that
redux
was terrible.
with Jim, yeah, with Jim Belushi, I think. And but I mean, I remember watching both of those a lot at the time. And now that I look back on it, I go, I don't know how, because it was definitely something I don't think I understood when I first watched it. It was far too dark. It was far too like, I think the draw was very much people like Belushi and Aykroyd. But it's again, it's not a it's not just a silly old jaunt. There's a lot more going on in this film, and there's a lot
Well,
of references to other actors and sort of cameos and all sorts of weird things going on that you really had to kind of have a wider spectrum than say when I first watched this when I was younger.
well, like I remember watching it the first time, and at the very start of the movie, the prison officer gives Jake back his belongings that he had when he went in, and he says one prophylactic, unused, one prophylactic used. And I remember watching that the first time, and I went, "What the hell's a prophylactic? I don't know what that is." And
Yeah,
why is it disgusting that it's a used one?
this we were young. What?
Yeah, I was like 12 maybe or something. I had no idea what half the jokes meant,
Yeah,
but
we
I
were
still
watching Star Wars and Top Gun. That was kind of where we were at.
yeah. So your next movie.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, my next movie, and that actually brings us to our sixth because we've gone through your three. And I'm not sure about this one. Sorry, when I say I'm not sure, I'm absolutely sure it's not should be on this list. But it's funny, I would never have guessed this was going to come onto my list, and I think it's because right now at the moment, it's another John Hughes movie, and I'm just going to sort of give some background to that. At the moment, what's going on in America is there's a series of sort of a musical theater group. That's probably wrong terminology. They'd kill me for that, but it's called For the Record Live. And at the moment, they've been playing a lot of For the Record Live, Dear John Hughes. And what it is like a number of sort of singers and actors are going to these shows, like almost like clubs, and they're performing live. And they're performing kind of scenes out of movies, like Some Kind of Wonderful, even though Some Kind of Wonderful was never a musical. But they'll perform. So Rachel Evan Wood, who's obviously an actress, um, and she's been playing Watts at the moment in a revival of this in Chicago. And I know this has traveled a bit. And if you go onto YouTube, you'll see a lot of, Dear John Hughes. You'll see a lot of people, sort of singing songs in character of Ferris Bueller, for instance, where they do the whole parade sort of thing. And they kind of, it's a bit like, it'll be at a restaurant or a bar, and people will be kind of, in the audience doing their own thing, and then all of a sudden, like these guys will break out and act out a kind of a few scenes or lines in a John Hughes movie, and then it will pump into a song, right? So, for instance, there's Some Kind of Wonderful. They will use Try a Little Tenderness, which is not a song from the movie, in the kissing scene, but they kind of do lines in the kissing scene and then they start singing, or they'll do Kids in America, stuff like that, and what Rachel Evan Wood. Playing Watts' character and kind of all this stuff. So I've been watching a lot of this just on social media and looking at it and kind of being somewhat jealous that it's not here in my country. And I just love that idea. But again, it comes back to John Hughes and the music that he managed to attach to the time period through his movies, But I would never have guessed this would be one of my films because at the time I enjoyed the film and I remember older kids or family members loving this film. But it was probably a little bit, I wasn't quite getting it straight away, or I didn't, whatever. But anyway, the movie that was the third on my list and is my favorite movie, one of my favorite movies from the 80s, or in the top three, and probably that is The Breakfast Club. It's a movie that's just having its 30th year anniversary this year. So it's a 1985 movie, and it is. And I'm going
A lot of teenage boys have a crush on Molly Ringwald.
Yeah, I mean, but and Molly Ringwald was, this sort of a John Hughes's go-to person at this time, and she's brilliant, and she had this different look and classic beauty. She's still classically beautiful, but like she just had this different thing on camera. It was just magical, and she had a gentleness, sort of, it was just, you
Yeah,
know,
so you retweeted my picture of her, not my
yeah,
picture of her, but the picture from the 30th anniversary. She
yeah, and
looks
I mean,
phenomenal. She doesn't look like she's. I mean, she's aged a
phenomenal.
little, but phenomenal.
She looks absolutely amazing. And I'm just going to read from this rather than IMDb. There was a recent article from the Nerdist, and they described the story of five teenagers, all from different backgrounds and family situations, none of whom seem to want anything to do with each other, forced to spend a Saturday detention together and learning to coexist. This quickly struck a chord with young people, and thanks to cable TV again, continues to do so. Each of the kids fit into a stereotype, but that's exactly the point. You had the jock expected for greatness, that's Emilio Estevez, obviously Charlie Sheen's brother, and again, famous in his own right, part of the Brat Pack at the time. The article goes on, the misunderstood rich girl, that was Molly Ringwald. The picked-on dork, Anthony Michael Hall, who was brilliant again in Weird Science later on in his career. The super weird outcast, Ali Sheedy, who was fantastic in the movie. And the one rebelling against everything, Judd Nelson.
Mm. Who steals the show?
Yeah, I mean, like,
who Bender in Futurama is named after?
really?
Yeah.
Oh,
That?
yeah, that's right. That's right.
And Sean Bender in Breakfast Club, and Bender's named after him.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I mean, just finishing this quote from an article there, Kyle Anderson from the Nerdist, he sort of summarized it saying, "They do not like each other. They, as the tagline suggests, have nothing in common, and probably they won't stay friends after detention ends. But for that one day, they learn something. That's such a crazy idea, and is totally universal, despite the style and slang. Don't you forget about me. Could not be a more apt theme song." I mean, this is a movie set in a school with a number of different characters who wouldn't necessarily be friends if they weren't put together, and how they deal with the situation and come together or not come together, as the case may be. Again, it's about John Hughes doing what he does. He deals with kids so well. Each character, yes, they're a stereotype, but each one is interesting, in its own right. You might not like Judd Nelson's character, but he has something to say. And it reveals something, that he's not just some rebel without a cause. I mean, he may be a rebel without a cause, but he has something to say about it. And that, don't judge a book by its cover. And, his characters deliberately are guilty of doing that in a lot of his films. But that's a plot device so that they get over that judging a book by its cover. Again, a theme that's addressed jokingly by Watts in Say Anything, but or in Some Kind of Wonderful. But again, a fantastic movie, some classic jokes, classic scenes, classic setups, and similar ideas that ran through Ferris Bueller, one of your top picks. Great music, something to define itself, an adventure romp in its own right. But it kind of had a little bit for everyone. As he says, you've got the jock, you've got the socially, sort of, or wealthy, sort of popular girl. You've got the slightly weird girl in Ali Sheedy. You've got the nerd in Anthony Michael Hall. I mean, these were all characters that just were constantly played out again through the 80s. But they did it well. It's heartwarming in the sense that, this collection of group, this misfit group, somehow managed to come together, or at least maybe not come together, but certainly see common goals, or at least are able to relate to each other and argue with each other, not giving anything away. But it's really about the relationships that binds them in a forced situation. And in the absence of the forced situation, maybe not, they would never, as the article says, have ever met or wanted to meet. Or
well, all of the characters say that. At one point or another, like they all say, "I would never hang out with you," or "You would never hang out with me." This would have been on my list, only, so out of 80s teen movies, this was my favorite when I was a teenager.
Uh-huh.
And the only reason it didn't make my list is what I mentioned at the start, that for me, it had to be a movie that I still found entertaining today. So as probably my favorite teen movie from the 80s, I tried showing this to my sons who are, I have twin sons who are 16, which would have been about the same age as I was when I saw it first. So we watched it together, and they couldn't stand it for more than maybe. Okay.
Sorry.
Is that the Oscar music that plays me off?
I'm just going to turn it down. I just got a gift going on here, but sorry, Simon, go on.
Yeah, so as I was saying, so I figured as teenagers, either I would enjoy it or they would enjoy it, or maybe both. And they didn't enjoy it at all. They thought it was very boring and left after, I think Daniel lasted 20 minutes and Matthew maybe 40. And myself, I didn't enjoy it either and found it incredibly boring. And that's not something that I was expecting because I really loved it when I was a teenager. But the thing, it just didn't speak to me anymore as it did when I was a teenager. So as I say, it would have been probably my favorite teen movie, John Hughes-esque teen movie from the 80s. I can remember when I first saw it. So I was babysitting my cousins, and they had a bunch of videotapes that they'd bought or whatever. And one of them was Breathless, and the other one was Breakfast Club. Breathless with Richard Gere I didn't really enjoy. But Breakfast Club I played, and then the next time I went back to babysit, I watched it again. Which was only a month later or something because I loved it so much. But now, it is very kind of stagey. It's it's a stage play more than a film. It's one room for 90% of the movie.
Yeah. I think that's true about a lot of Hughes' movies. I mean, there's elements of the narration in the beginning of Ferris Bueller's, which has an element of that. There's an element of narration at the end of The Breakfast Club, which is an element of stagey kind of thing. And in the sense that this breaking of the fourth wall and talking to the audience, this happens a bit, in both movies.
Well, I meant more that. So if you tried to make Ferris Bueller a stage play, it'd take a lot of changes.
Sure.
To make it a stage play. If you tried to make Breakfast Club a stage play, you'd have to cut out the bit where they're being dropped off by their parents, or else change it a little bit. And then the rest is just in the detention hall, so it's essentially a bunch of desks on a stage. Could work.
No, I agree. Look, absolutely. And the truth is you could anyway. There's not a lot of action scenes. I mean, even Say Anything, Some Kind of Wonderful, could be a stage play because there isn't a lot of activity outside. So you just change scenes. So you just leave out the scenes where they were walking, by a rail yard or whatever. They'd just be, in a bar or in the party or at the museum. So it would just be, change of scenery, that kind of thing. But obviously Ferris Bueller with car chases and all that sort of stuff might be more difficult. But these days, the way they do musicals, it would be actually easy enough. I agree with you. There's definitely a stagey. There is a stagey element of all being in there, and it therefore being hugely character focused as a movie for sure.
Well,
one thing I think is correct though. I remember when I first watched The Breakfast Club, I didn't get it straight away. I wasn't quite clued in with the actors. I also think as well, when you see something for the first time. And when you've watched something so many times over the years, it's hard to watch things again because you may have forgotten actually everything, but your mind kind of almost fills in the blanks or sort of tricks you into thinking, oh yeah, I'm not really wanting to watch this again because I know what's happening, and it loses some of its magic, and that can happen to all films for sure.
Well, I think it's a problem, but the issue I had at least with Breakfast Club is the Breakfast Club is mostly monologues about the different characters' opinions on what the world is and what their perspective is on life. So
Mm.
you get like Judd Nelson giving a monologue about how he's bullied by his father, and you get Molly Ringwald giving a monologue about how hard life is hard for a princess. In she has to always be popular and all the things and all this kind of stuff. And then you get a monologue from what was it? The nerdy guy. Who was that again? Andrew something. Hang on. Andrew Michael, Anthony Michael, sorry, Anthony Michael, about how everyone expects him to get the best grades and all this kind of stuff, and you get a monologue from Emilio Estevez about how he bullied some guy just to be cool, and you get all these monologues, and that, I think, for me at least, you're right that I know what the monologues are.
Mm.
Whereas if you look at Princess Bride, it's a lot of kind of snappy jokes, and there's things you can miss, and there's lots of action going on and stuff like that. But The Breakfast Club has a message to tell you, and once you've heard the message, I guess that's it. You've heard it. Like, you can listen to it again, but it's kind of, you've heard what what John Hughes had to say about whatever he was talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating, it's a fascinating movie. Even looking at some of the trivia behind this movie, the way it was created, definitely worth checking out. I mean, John Hughes almost fired Judd Nelson allegedly because of his attitude towards Molly Ringwald. Seemingly, they just did not get on off camera. Obviously, not on camera either. Um,
But that might have worked for the characters, I guess.
Seemingly, it was shot entirely in sequence. And that John Hughes wrote the screenplay to the movie in just 2 days, the 4th and 5th of July, 1982.
I can
So fantastic sort of background sort of stuff going on about some stuff here that really worth reading for sure. Classic movie of its time, classic movie. I mean, maybe it doesn't stand the test of time, but
Well, I think it's down to
for me, it's something that definitely, when you think 80s, you think The Breakfast Club, the movies of The Breakfast Club, the people who were in those movies who went on to do other types of movies, they're all encapsulated there. When you think Michael Hall, you think Weird Science, so he's in that movie. Judd Nelson, not my favorite actor, but he was in so many different things. Emilio Estevez, Ali Sheedy, all of the Brat Packers. It is the quintessential, St. Elmo's Fire, everything else that went on from these things. I mean, crazy. Molly Ringwald in everything.
Like, if I'd done my top 3 movies differently, like if I'd said the movies that I loved most in the 80s, then The Breakfast Club would have been there. The only reason it's not on that list is because I chose to select movies that I still think hold up today. So as like it is, you're right. It's a quintessential 80s movie. If you wanted to, if you went back in time to the 80s and you wanted to show someone like a perfect movie, then Breakfast Club would be perfect. It just, for me at least, didn't age particularly well, and my kids weren't interested at all. Whereas Blues Brothers, or Princess Bride, or the other one I picked, I've sat them down in front of those and they've watched them the whole way. Ferris Bueller's, of course. They've watched them the whole way through and loved them. So yeah, I think it's definitely, it's down to where we were as well in the just our situation in the 80s and what we were going through and stuff, where teenagers today are not going through the same things we were going through.
Yeah, different things for sure, but definitely I think that's the thing. I mean, I think one of the reasons I think it has to be in my list, or something I had to talk about, is that at the time I certainly wouldn't have put it into my top thing, but I can't. It's something that I just can't ignore years on, that it didn't have some sort of serious effect on me. And when I think about just John Hughes's on all of his films, many consider this to be his best. I don't, because I think Some Kind of Wonderful is his best. But I think it probably has to be there. But on
I
that,
was going to mention.
yeah,
Sorry, I was going to mention one last thing on Breakfast Club, which is annoys the crap out of me about Breakfast Club. So mostly I liked liked the movie, but I guess it's a minor spoiler for Breakfast Club. But there's three boys and there's two girls,
yeah.
and the boys and the girls pair up, and it's the nerd, the computer nerd, who doesn't get it.
He was
As the
younger than
computer nerd.
everybody else.
Huh?
He was younger than everybody else.
No, he was the same age. He was in the same class as Emilio Estevez's character.
I mean, Anthony Michael looked younger than everybody else. I'm not sure.
He
Maybe.
looked younger, maybe, but that just annoyed me because at the time that was just like over and over and over and over and over. Nerds, no. Nerds, no. Nerds don't get girls. Nerds aren't cool. No nerds. Like even in the movie The Breakfast Club, where they all admit that the nerd is actually a decent guy and they like him,
Yeah.
still doesn't get the girl. That really irritated me at the time, and it still irritates me now because it's just annoying. Why aren't girls interested in nerds, Mike?
I think there were. Yeah. Well, I think there were probably other movies in the 80s that maybe might have satisfied you in relation to that. It's very funny when we were looking at this. One movie I'd totally forgotten about till we started looking at this list is a film called Real Genius. I don't know if you remember it, with Val Kilmer, and it's about a bunch of nerds, for want of a better word, who are trying to do some design on a laser. And so there's this school, and Val Kilmer's the head of this kind of brain box trust of kids, and all these other kids come in who are all nerds and stuff like that. And you know, that whole you never forget the whole Revenge of the Nerds and that kind of concept, born out of the 80s, never to be seen in the 90s. So actually, there are movies in the 80s that could have satisfied you with, but actually, Real Genius is something that I watched at the time, and I remember watching the shit out of that movie. Like, watching it. Back in those days, you used to watch a video 5 or 6 times before you put it back to the video store.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't do that now. You're just old. You just once is enough, and if you can barely get through a movie without sleeping. But yeah, no, I mean, I took that movie. Now I'm like going, I'm going to get that again because I want to see that. I'm sure it doesn't stack up at all, but I'm
Well, I never saw it at the time, but I tried to watch it about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was just atrocious. I gave up after.
It probably was, but then again, I think it's probably going to be cool. I'll tell you about it. I'm going to watch it now between now and the next week's podcast. Maybe I'll give you an update, and maybe you're absolutely right. All right, well, we're going to end it now. We've kind of gone an hour and a half. You can get me at Bad Barrister on Twitter if anyone wants to tweet me up and ask, or even put in questions for us to answer in next week's podcast, which will go on Irish time 8:30, and next Thursday. We do it every week. It'll be episode 6 next week. As I said, you can catch me up on @BadBarrister on Twitter. Feel free to suggest topics or ask questions, and myself and Simon will have a look at them, and we'll talk about them next week if you want to do that. Anyone listening, if you have any suggestions for the podcast, you're the listeners. If there's anyone out there listening to this podcast, please by all means get interactive. If anyone wants even to suggest coming on as a guest speaker, please by all means let's see that. We're into our experimental stage now. We're getting confident. We're into a new wave now. We've moved into the territory of 80s movies, and we can talk about anything. I don't know what the topic will be next week, but hopefully we'll think of something interesting. Simon, where can we get you if we want to see your stuff?
SimonCanton.com.
Fantastic. You can catch up all of his self-published books over there and other blog-esque writings. Okay, as we sign off, I'm going to sign off by playing a very short clip of The Breakfast Club to sign us out, and hopefully we'll see you guys sometime next week. Well, the same time next week at 8:30. So we will see you then.
Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it was we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us as you want to see us. In the simplest terms, the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain and an athlete
And a basket case. A princess.
and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club.
Don't